One. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Steve, great to have you here. And to kick off, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
My name's Steve Colling, and I my background is psychology, and I'm really as a behavioural scientist. I wear two hats. One, I work as a researcher. I conduct studies on behalf of companies who are looking to understand people's attitudes and behaviours. And then in recent years, I've focused a lot more around the whole issue of longevity and health span and lifespan. And I now do coaching either with individuals or small groups through a coaching program called Retireless, really premised on the idea that our traditional notions of retirement are somewhat out of date now, as we all live longer and, in some cases, healthier lives.
Mhm.
And what should we be doing with this sort of third act in our lives? Because I think just the nomenclature around retirement is all wrong. It sends out the wrong signals. So program has five pillars. They're all the usual suspects. It's about nutrition, it's about movement and exercise, it's about sleep, it's about mental well-being and connection, and it's about trying to reduce our exposure to toxins in our environment. So I'm really working with people, collecting data, so it's got quite a scientific underpinning to it, but equally it's very habits driven. I'm a very passionate believer that as we get older, we really just become the collection of our own habits. They define what we do and our personalities. And so if you want to make long-term changes to, in this case, people's health, you have to look to unpick bad health habits and replace them with pro-health habits, which is not always as easy as it sounds.
Wow. I mean, you've just made me think of like loads of stuff. I'll just share a couple with you. I've just come back from a kindness summit that I was involved with in Florida. And one of the organizations that took part is a senior living setting called Shell Point, very progressive thinking. And a couple of things came out of the interaction with the people there. One, there was a fabulous presentation about the impact of kindness on longevity and drawing the direct relationship between the two. It was fascinating to hear about. And then the other piece of research that comes to mind that you might be interested to look up is out of UCL London, where they researched the impact of art on people's well-being. And they came to the conclusion that the positive impact was similar to that of exercise in terms of physical benefit, which is astonishing, or to me, it's astonishing. So a couple of things there, and your point about you said retireless.
Yes, yes.
So I use a word refirement, which I suppose is a similar approach where it's just making the point that the word retirement is just no longer appropriate for the way we are at that age these days.
Yes, exactly. I think it puts us into a mindset which isn't the right one to look at the what are the potentially the huge opportunities that we all have in the second half of our life. We tend to characterize it as a period of decline, and retirement is about slowing down and
Yeah,
winding down and whatever. And actually, if you think of it in terms of plays, our third act is the finest. It's where all everything comes together. So reframing, and it's certainly something more generally, I think, is one of my interests is this relationship between how we think, how we express things, and the language we use to do it, and the sort of bi-directional relationship between the words we use and our values and beliefs. Interesting you point about kindness. I think it links to a lot of work that's been done around uh, social connection and longevity, and things like
Yeah,
the blue zones, for example, are a
yeah,
very good example of where social connection, at least they prove a correlation, if not causation,
yeah.
between the two. Uh, Art, again, there was a piece in The Guardian, I think, a week or two around this, and maybe it's linked to the
I think
event
yeah,
you went to. It's not something I know a lot about, but it makes intuitive sense. I think we underestimate the influence of the things like our dopamine systems and whatever on how it lowers things like cortisol, which is something which is obviously quite damaging to our inflammation systems and whatever. And so this sort of mind body link in terms of health and longevity, I think, is sometimes underplayed, because we get so fixated on all the sort of physical biomarkers of how often we're going to the gym and how many hours sleep we've clocked and whatever. All very important, but the only reason we do any of these health things, I think, is because we're looking for purpose, fulfillment, happiness, joy, spending time with people we love. There's no point in being super healthy and not having any of that. So the mental
absolutely right.
well-being piece, I think, is central. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that whole approach, rather than physical only kind of thing, is the way to go. Are you familiar with the term sophrology?
No, I'm not.
So, sophrology is a whole person practice, which has an aim to do exactly what you've just described, where as a person, physically and mentally and soulfully, if you like, you're in the right place. I have some connections in that space, and so I can share those with you if you're interested to research. But now we're going to choose a card from the Value
Yes.
Jam deck. So I'm just going to give them a quick shuffle. And while I'm doing that, have a think about how many piles of cards you'd like me to lay out in front of me. So, how many piles, Steve?
Let's go for two.
Two. Okay, one's bigger, one's smaller. And so I've got pile one on my left and pile two on my right. Which one will you choose?
Let's go for pile two.
Pile two. Well, that's the smaller pile, so that's helped me. And now
Okay.
a number between 1 and 18, please.
Oh, let's go for five.
Five. Okay, now, what's your immediate reaction to this one?
Humility. Yes. It's um it's something I personally attach a lot of value to. I think it's probably one of the defining characteristics of my father, um, who was a physicist. And one of the things I always admired about him is no matter what he did or what his achievements were, he always just displayed a great humility. It was a very strong, for a gentle characteristic, it was a very strong trait, if that makes sense. And I think in a world where we're constantly surrounded by people, sort of very loudly displaying their successes and achievements and whatever. And clearly, social media is a prime example. Um, I think, yeah, I think I recognize that it's something that I look for in other people, that I empathize with, that I respect in them, that there's more sort of below the surface than perhaps one sees immediately.
Mm. And I'm conscious that your father's top of mind for you at the moment because he passed a couple of weeks ago,
Yes,
right?
yes, he did. Yes, that's
And
right.
so I'm sorry about that, but perhaps this is a beautiful reminder. Um, and I mentioned the kindness summit, and actually, there's another connection here because we deliberately chose in the visual identity for the brand to be a lowercase k and then the 20 in K20, because we wanted to reinforce the point that kindness can be quiet and small, yet nonetheless powerful in a world where, exactly as you say, people encourage us that we have to be loud and big, and it's not the case. So that's another lovely connection. But to get into this a bit further, then, Steve, let's explore a very simple question on the surface, but maybe not so simple when you dig in. What does humility mean?
Oh, um, I think in my mind, I associate it with um, sort of more people who have more intrinsic rather than extrinsic values, if you like, that um, they're more concerned with things that sort of matter to them or for its own sake or for the feeling it creates or whatever, rather than doing things because it will make them look better. People will think they're younger, think they will be seen to be performing better or whatever. So it's they're they're less driven by looking for external validation, if you
Mm,
like.
mm. And when exploring that, what comes to mind, and I've learned in Values Jams that if something crosses your mind, you should just share it, rather than think, oh, is that relevant? So please
Yes.
forgive me if this feels a bit kind of off piece, but it's come, so I'll share. And what you've described brought to mind two types of band in the world of music. One is the fabricated boy band, where they make songs that are really catchy, and the aim is to sell millions of records and make a load of money for whoever. And then the other is the kind of smaller cult artist who is adored by a much smaller following and play their music because they want to play their music. Does that resonate with you in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could find all sorts of similar examples, well, across other arts, but also elsewhere in terms of people's people's just interest in pursuing things for the almost sort of the purity of its own sake. There is no sort of commercial
Yeah,
angle
yeah.
driving it. And I suspect you only have to go back a few hundred years, and that is generally why people did things, because there wasn't the kind of commercial model around us that we've now normalized. Um, so so yes, I think it touches on something wider for me, which is how we've just become quite, and it's not a new theme, but how we've become quite disconnected from sort of the essence of sort of what makes us human and what gives us pleasure. etc. We're shining the light in the wrong place very often. We're very acquisitive, status driven, money orientated. This is not a new story, but I don't know whether it's just a reflection of the things that have been on my reading list, or whether it's a sign of just my aging. But I think no, seriously, I think and this comes back to, the heart of this about values. I think I can see that whilst my overall values are probably quite deeply hardwired within me, and were probably set by my my parents to some extent, and early childhood
Yeah,
experience. I think what's happened is they've sort of the priorities changed over the years. So some of the values I had in that kind of propelled me through my 20s, 30s, 40s, which were quite acquisitive. They were about success and achievement and reward and whatever, are gradually just sort of being replaced by just, I suppose, broadly things that are sort of more introspective about how I guess that I'm a lot happier with less rather than more, and just how sort of liberating that is in a way to sort of escape that trap.
yeah. I'm just reflecting on very early in this conversation how for me, you nailed what humility is when you talked about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic. And then just now you were talking about how we've become kind of, I don't want to be too dramatic, but slaves to the system in many cases. And again, you've reminded me of a conversation with a colleague, and she was describing how they were dropping their kids off at, I can't remember whether it was a music class or a martial art, whatever it was, an activity. And she said, so her and her husband went into the center, and he said, oh, shall we have a chocolate muffin and a hot chocolate? Because there was a stand there, selling. And she said to him, no, we don't need a chocolate muffin and a hot chocolate at this time. We're just dropping off our kids. And although it was such a small example in the conversation, it really struck me that that's the way society often works now. It's not anything about what we need or want. It's about putting temptation, if you want, in place and extracting money from us.
Absolutely. I and I think we're fighting, if you like, against a very difficult system that exists all around us as soon
Yeah,
as we step outside
yeah,
our houses. It's one that's evolved into something that's constantly trying to nudge us into doing unhealthy things. And I come back to this word normalizing, that it feels quite acceptable that we are very sedentary, that we eat an awful lot of sugar and salt and fat, and too much of it, and too often, and we do all these things um, because it just feels like we're fitting in.
yeah,
And so actually the challenge of sort of rewiring some of our habits, not only I think is it sort of internally difficult because you've got decades year worth of having reinforced behaviors around, well, I always have a chocolate muffin with my coffee or whatever. How do you start to replace that? And oh, I'll have some broccoli instead. It's just not going to work. Um, but on the other hand, it kind of puts you out of alignment with the people you mix with and the
yeah,
places you
yeah.
go and whatever. There's quite a big challenge, I think, there. And I think is why an awful lot of, I'll come back to health because it's, one of my main focuses, it's why a lot of people's attempts to get healthy get derailed is because they sort of rely on willpower and motivation to make change. And that's fine on day one. It might even be fine in week one, but very difficult if you constantly have to rely on willpower to
Yeah,
make decisions.
yeah,
If you can move things into the realm of habits, then life becomes a lot easier because habits are like defaults, I think. Um, and so if you can have, and I sort of bring it back to our core theme, if you can have habits that are well aligned with your values, so that they feel natural, they make sense, and it's allowed you to start to do things on autopilot, then actually making healthy choices starts to become a whole lot easier.
totally agree. And that's the core principle behind the My 31 Practices approach, where it's not easy at the beginning, right? You've defined these concrete, observable behaviors in line with your values, but it might not feel natural. But that's not the point. It's like, we'll just go with it anyway, and then when you've practiced it enough, it will start to feel natural eventually. Now that first question's led us into a really great place, but I want to draw us back to humility specifically.
Mm.
And this is a different style of question on the topic, and let's see where we go. It's more metaphoric. So when you think of the word humility, what images come to mind? What sounds come to mind? And what feelings come to mind?
Images, sounds. I find questions like this terribly difficult. I have to confess. I mean, I'm getting a sense, I suppose, of something that is calm. It's relaxing. It's not. There's no tension. There's no anxiety. Humility for me, I suppose, sits with other characteristics of well-being. I think people who just have a good sort of internal alignment, I guess,
Mm,
between what they care about, how they feel, what they do, what they listen to, how they treat others. I think generally are more likely to display characteristics of humility as well.
and for
Um,
just
I've kind of dodged part
now,
of your
what
question. You
either carry on, or I can give you like my immediate reaction, and then if you
yes,
want to build on that, then
let's
feel free.
let's do that.
So, in terms of feelings, for me, it's a really interesting combination between calmness and strength. So it's this quiet certainty thing, which feels great. Um, in terms of images, I don't know whether you're old enough to remember, there was a series on television, probably in the 1970s, with David Carradine in it. And he was a martial arts guy who just went about his life very peacefully and often got picked on by people. And he didn't react very easily, but when needed, he dealt with these people in no uncertain terms, but then just went about his life again. And he was my hero at that time, because I was thinking, wouldn't it be so cool to be like that, where you don't bother people, but if they bother you, you have the ability to just sort them out. So strange that he should come to mind. And then the sound is peaceful quietness. So does that give you anything to play with?
Um, your First point, I think, is certainly strikes a chord. I mean, you talk about quiet certainty. One of the terms that I would use to describe my father is quiet confidence. And I think they come from the same
Absolutely.
place. It's just kind of a knowing that
Hmm.
I can deal with this.
Yeah.
It will be okay.
Yeah.
There is no, there is no need for a big drama about this, or I don't have to shout it from the rooftops. I will sort it out, um, which I like a lot.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think in terms of um, the sound, the thing that was triggered when you were speaking is um, I know very little about. I know no, I know a little about Buddhism as a philosophy, but I do like quite a lot of the Buddhist chants, and increasingly when I do things like walk the dogs through the fields, I try not to take my phone with me, and I'm getting better at it. If I do take it though, I quite often will like to listen to things just quietly in the background, like Buddhist chants that just have this just mesmerizing sort of subtlety about how they just shift your mood
Yeah.
gently. There's nothing overwhelming about it, but it just sort of transports you into this sort of nice place, which for me complements just being surrounded by nature very nicely.
That's interesting. So, a couple of things. One, and I agree with you about the admiration slash attraction to philosophies like Buddhism and even other Eastern ways of doing or being in the world. And when last year I went to Calcutta and I visited I don't really know how to describe it. It was like a pluralist religious temple. So, not for any specific religion. And I went in the evening because I'd been told that there was some sort of ceremony that happened. And so I found this place eventually, which was a journey in itself because hardly anybody spoke any English and I didn't know where I was going. But anyway, I got there and went to this kind of temple like building, which was absolutely ram jammed with people sitting on the floor. And I could see in the distance at the front of the room a couple of guys with urns swinging and incense and all this sort of stuff. And like you've suggested, people were slowly swaying and not dramatically, but just swaying and humming or chanting or similar in unison. And wow, it was just so amazing to witness it, even though I had no idea what was going on. It just felt very good to be part of it. So I share with you that lack of understanding or knowledge of the area, but a really deep appreciation nonetheless. Um, and then there was something else, but it's gone. So if it comes back, it will, and if it doesn't, it doesn't matter. So that,
But interesting how that can cut through, I think, even in a very frenetic or busy environment. And I've spent a bit of time in Nepal and can remember something similar where you've got, the crazy bustle and whatever of
yeah,
Kathmandu, and then you just get the chants coming in, and it's remarkably calming effect. It's like sort of hearing your voice, that your name spoken in a crowded room. It somehow draws you to it.
yeah. Well, actually, you've made a great point there, the contrast between that feeling and then the hustle bustle, because Calcutta, oh my goodness. And actually, on that day, I took an Uber from the place where I was back to where I was staying. It was about a 1 hour drive. And I'm probably exaggerating, but for probably 75% of the time, the doors either side of our vehicle were within 3 inches of another vehicle
Yes.
and traveling at speed. And I was thinking, oh, I felt so rested just now, just when I was at this place. And now it's like this exhilarating experience. It was very enjoyable. And nobody hit each other. That was the other really weird thing. It just doesn't seem to make sense. And I've remembered the other thing actually, when you were talking about when you're on a walk and you listen to Buddhist chants, I don't, well, yes, I do take my phone, but I don't look at it very often when I'm on a walk. And I really enjoy bird song. We've got some ancient woodland near here, and so there are often birds around. And I love just taking it in properly and listening as it is part of that. So that's interesting that you make that point about the Buddhist chants complementing what you're seeing and where you are.
Yes. Yes. And birdsong, yeah, is another good example, I
Mm.
think. And I would agree. Um,
A colleague of
it's
mine who my next call is with him actually. He yesterday he shared that he's got this property project that he's working on in Kent. And do you know what a hoopoe is?
uh, yes, it's a kind of bird.
That's right. Yeah, it's a bird. And he heard a hoopoe in his back garden. And we were just talking about how do they come to this country at this time of the year and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, bird song is great. Now let's. This has been a fascinating kind of not even beginning. It's moved beyond that. And actually, another thing that's just landed with me is when you talked about the third act a little while ago. I
Mm.
love how you framed that because it strikes me that in our third act, if you relate it to our lives and maybe this concept of retirement, some of us have been fortunate enough not to be resource short like we were when we were younger with dreams. And so we're now in a better place to put resources to those dreams than maybe we have ever been before. We have the benefit of a life of experience, which we didn't have when we were younger. And some of us have more time available than when we were, working all the hours that God sent so that we could pay for the mortgage and all of that sort of stuff when we were younger. So I think your framing of the third act is just a really beautiful way to help people understand that they're at a potentially highly productive time of their life.
Yeah, yeah, I believe that quite strongly, and I think, and I can see this in myself. There's a sort of midlife period of adjustment where, in terms of my beliefs, my values, behaviors, realize that I was still doing or chasing certain things which are kind of they were past the end of their shelf life. They had served me well when I was younger, but they were now irrelevant or a distraction in in some way. And that was that was very liberating, I think. Quite challenging, but quite sort of liberating to go through that. And I'm reminded of, I don't know if you've come across Chip Conley.
Yeah.
Yes. And he talks about this difference between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. And I don't know, actually, I don't even know if it's his or it's Arthur Brooks' concept. Either way, the the idea being simply that when we're young, we have this fluid intelligence which allows us to focus in sort of laser sharp on specific projects or tasks and do
Yeah.
them extremely well. As we get older, we get this crystallized intelligence, which is closer to what we might refer to as wisdom,
Hmm.
where our brains just work in a different way. They don't have that same sort of speed and agility, but what they do have is this ability to sort of map a greater number of moving parts, if you like,
Yeah.
and be able to interpret things in a wider context. And I think this is something that potentially just sort of adds a whole level of sort of richness to how we think about what we do, what we can offer in later life. So rather than lamenting the fact that we've got this gradual cognitive decline, which we have, um, we I come back to reprioritizing. You sort of think about how our intelligence has shifted to a different way of thinking, which actually is beneficial in some ways.
Hmm.
It's nicer to be able to step back and see a wider perspective.
Mm. And I'm tempted to go back to what you touched on with social media, because as we've been talking, I've been thinking, wow, humility is such a powerful and positive thing. That's one. But then a counter argument is saying, well, not much hope for humility in the systems that we've created because everything relies on you getting the message out there. And there seems to be a contradiction there. So what hope is there for humility?
Interesting. Um, I think, I mean, there is, let me step back to answer that. There is somebody works in the longevity field, a chap called David Sinclair, famously made the quote, the first person to live to 150 has already been born. Um, it's
Wow.
quite a bold thing to
Yeah.
say. Um, Whether or not he's right, what is true is that, as we know, around the world, people are living an awful lot longer,
Yeah.
and um, there is an increasing focus on how we use that time and what role older people have in society, and how one structures the stages of one's life. If you may be working, yeah, up into your 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. Now, the I think the reason for saying all of that is I think it does provide hope for humility, because I think if you have a larger proportion of the population in the midlife and beyond demographic who have made this shift from acquisitive values
Yeah.
to more intrinsic values, then I'm making an assumption, but I think it will lead to humility just playing a greater sort of role in the sort of zeitgeist of things.
So yeah, I think what you're describing lands really easily with me because the logic is simple to follow, right? It's the numbers. If there's more people
Yeah.
with humility as a percentage of the whole, then they're going to have a greater influence. So that's the hope. That makes a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, and to sort of knit it together with this earlier point about wisdom, and if you look at indigenous tribes of people, or if we go back just a few generations, then it was the society's elders that was seen to hold
yeah.
all the wisdom, and that's been taken away to a large extent by technology and Google and other things. If you're looking for wisdom, you go to ChatGPT. You don't go to your granddad. Um, Now, I think we lose something in that. Coming back to this point about crystallized intelligence
Mm.
that we're sort of missing an opportunity here if we only listen to the voices of the young technologists, if you like.
Yeah, I think the point for me there is that, and I'm not disagreeing with you what you just described, but I think perhaps the reason that that situation has come about is because there isn't a clear enough differentiation between knowledge and wisdom. So, yes, by all means, go to Google or an AI because absolutely it knows more than your granddad, but it doesn't have the ability to apply wisdom like your granddad still does.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm in agreement. We live in a society where there's a tendency to see everything in a sort of bipolar way. It's either this or it's that.
Yeah.
And I sort of go through life believing almost everything that happens to us happens in the shades of grey between the two. And so here, it's not about technology versus uh, aged wisdom. It's that they both have a role, and the gestalt, the bringing them together creates something that's bigger than the sum of the parts.
Agree. And what you were just describing there about everything being in the grey made me think about how when you have that paradigm, that is in a way humility in action because some people think that they are able to exert much more influence on what is than they are in reality. And when you accept that things are just in the grey and they are as they are, and you're just in it, then maybe that's the beginnings of humility in a very general way. I understand that, and feels like a really good place to bring this values jam to a close. And the thought that there is hope for humility, which I love the way you describe that. So, to wrap it up, we do finish with a question, which is what are you encouraged to do differently about humility as a result of this conversation?
I you touched on the fact that I lost my father recently, and I will be speaking at his funeral shortly. And so I'm simultaneously in the process of collecting my thoughts around that. And I think it's just very interesting that humility is the card that came up. And because it's something I've been thinking quite a lot about generally. And I'm, as you can see, I'm certainly no expert on it, but it is without a doubt one of the defining characteristics that my father had. And I think a combination of this call and this context is it's caused me to take a clearer look at my own humility. Um, and a sort of honest look at it, I guess, because often there is a dissonance, there's a gap between what we actually think we believe and how we actually behave. And I can say categorically, I do not have as much humility as my father. And if there was something that I would like to, if you like, inherit and take forward, and I think this conversation helps underline that, is perhaps going forward, just develop a greater sense of humility. Take that value and just put it better into practice in daily life.
Mm. And if I may, I'm going to push you a little bit on that one. So, if that's the general direction that you're going to move in, what's a first baby step on the way?
Oh, um, it's the first step. I have no idea. And I think that's honest.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
wondering whether there's something, it could be tiny, and you've talked about
yeah.
practices and you've talked about habits. What is there that's possibly really small but could be an important first step towards that general direction that you just described?
I just don't have a top of mind
Okay, maybe
answer
it
for
might
you.
be that that
It
question
is,
will kind of go
yes,
around a bit.
I mean, it's a very good question.
Mm.
Um, I think it's one of those moments where I need to reflect
Yeah, yeah,
and
that
think,
often happens,
whatever.
and probably a
Yes.
sleep tonight will help with that as well. But I have to say, I'm, what am I? I'm feeling a bit emotional actually, because for you to be saying that this conversation plays to how you're feeling about your father's passing and your when you're going to be talking at the funeral, I'm really touched by that. Um, and then the my takeaway from this conversation is that it's really timely because this weekend, so tomorrow, I'm taking my eldest daughter and eldest son to Portugal because a couple of years ago we all agreed that we would do something different for their birthdays. So previously it had been on the birthday, here's a gift. And I suggested that I didn't want to do that anymore. What I wanted to do instead was for them to choose something they really enjoyed doing and that we would find time to do it together and it needn't be on their birthday.
Mm.
So Lucy said, "Hey, Dad, what I want to do for my birthday this year is go surfing."
Okay.
And when we used to go on holiday, surfing was something that we did sometimes. So I agreed. And then Jack said, "I don't want to do something separate this time. I want to come surfing with you guys." So what I'm thinking is that humility is absolutely going to have to be dialed right up when I try and stand up and fall off or can't stand up or whatever it is. Um, yeah, so I'm looking forward to that being right front of mind when I'm in the water this weekend.
Yes. And it's a very good point, I think, that I think just learning new things, putting yourself in that space of I might fail at this, I might embarrass myself,
Yeah,
whatever,
undoubtedly.
is a very good way of surfacing your humility. And maybe that's the lines I should be thinking along here is, maybe this is one of those sort of pivotal moments where I should launch in. Maybe this is my opportunity to learn more about Buddhism or something, put myself in a space of fresh learning that is kind of consonant with some of the other themes we've been talking about.
Mm. And actually, that exploration of Buddhism would be so meaningful at a number of levels, right? Because on the one hand, it's you accepting that you don't know about this thing and maybe feeling inadequate because of that. But it's absolutely aligned with the topic of humility as well, because it's central to the whole philosophy. So, well, interesting to see if that's what you end up pursuing. So, Steve, thank you so much for this. It's been a wonderful start to my day and the weekend. So, thank you very much.
And thank you. Yeah, very interesting discussion. So thank you.